Hey there. Let's continue with our refactorings of Futurecam. Now we will be looking at this item. Change is long recording mode to a marker protocol. First, let's define what a mode is. Camera app has different modes: photo, video, time lapse, etc. Some of these are what I call a long recording mode, where the user has to press once to start recording, then again to stop recording, like a video, as opposed to a photo, which does not require a second click to stop. So it's not a long recording mode. And we have this function isLongRecordingMode to identify which is and isn't a long recording. In the base class or superclass, which is called mode, you have this class bar. This is what is called a computed property. It looks like a variable, but when you access it, this code gets executed. You don't need to use parentheses. So if you have a function called, let's say, func is expired, let's say, with some code, you have to use it this way: if is expired with parentheses. On the other hand, if you make it a computed property, then you can skip the parentheses. So it's a little more natural to call. So that is what. And all these refactorings are independent of Swift, like the principles I'm showing you. They would apply to many languages. So even if you're not an iOS engineer, this video will give you value. Now, this is a class var, which means it's like a static var, but classes can override it. So in burst mode, you have overridden it to return false. So burst mode is not a long recording mode, but every other mode is a long recording mode. That's why it returns true in the base class. And the way you invoke is this way: if type of self is long recording. So self is like this in Java and C++, and type of self returns a class object, and on that you are invoking this. Because it's a class function, you have to invoke it this way. You can't just do self dot isLong. Now the main problem here is you have a function that returns true or false based on the class. So everything except burst mode is a long recording mode. But this is an odd way of implementing it. A more reasonable way of implementing it would be to use a marker protocol. So you would do protocol. Protocol is like an interface in Java. Swift calls it protocol. Have this protocol, and instead of calling this function is long recording, you would just check whether it is an instance of this. So you delete this. Everything except burst mode, every mode except burst mode would implement this marker protocol. Let's keep it to 100 characters. Comments and documentation require maintenance. It's not something you do once and then ignore, because then the documentation becomes out of it. Now, yeah, you would get rid of this. Oops. These. These are the correct syntax. Check class. Get a meta type. You want to check if meta type type conforms to protocol. The language that Apple uses is a class conforms to a protocol. It doesn't implement an interface. So this is conforms to. This is what. This is an NS object based class. So you don't even need to query the class. Oh, but you have. Here you don't have an object. You just have the type. So we are getting this meta type. I can't click. I want to see what methods. I think we have to annotate it at objc. Class.self as. Oh, see how counterintuitive it is. You can do is. Yeah. So if mode type is long recording mode dot type. Okay, good. So let's close the earlier files. Who is, we have this type hierarchy we need to figure out. Non-real-time video. Okay, this itself is bad. We have a non-real-time video mode. We should be checking for that, not each of the subclasses. But we'll get to that later. Just make a note. Time-lapse mode. Time-lapse mode is a non-real-time video mode. How do we close the search? I want to see a folder. Just restart. Okay. So light trail video mode extends from non-real-time video. Here we can implement a long record. Then you have this abstract multi-frame photo mode. Who inherits from that? Long exposure mode does. Is this the only one? Okay, that is another improvement we need to make. Has only one subclass. Merge. Long. How do I see the folder tree? Explore. Okay. Can I pin it? Keep it. Okay. So let's audit all the classes in this package to see whether everything except burst mode implements long recording mode. Abstract multi-frame photo mode does. Burst mode doesn't. Light trail video mode extends from non-real-time video mode, which does. Long exposure mode extends from abstract multi-frame photo mode, which does. The base class obviously doesn't implement long recording mode. Time-lapse mode again extends from this. So I think all of them are taken care of. Abstract multi-frame photo mode inherits long recording mode. This implementation is removed. We have a marker protocol. A marker protocol is something that doesn't have any members. You just check whether you inherit from it or not. In retrospect, having a short recording mode would be easier because all but one class, because only one class is short recording, but that's okay. Easier to understand if you call it a non-real-time video mode. And instead of calling is long recording, we check if it is a long recording mode. This takes care of long exposure. Burst doesn't require anything. This takes care of light trail and time lapse. That covers it. Burst, exposure, light trail, and time lapse are the modes in the UI. Great. Change is long. Great. What do we work on now? Hint manager is just a namespace. This class hint manager is just a namespace. It holds a bunch of static functions. It's never instantiated because the initializer, which is Swift speak for constructor, is private and even then raises an error. Swift doesn't have a namespace like C++. So you have to kind of use/misuse a class for it. But I guess it's okay. I mean, it's better to namespace it than to dump them all in the global scope. You don't want to pollute the global namespace. So hint manager dot show necessary hints. Hint manager dot show toast. It's logical. These are all hints. So let's leave it as it's not clear. Action. Looking for something easy to do, putting off the hard work. Let's take a stab at remove optional numeric. So the motivation behind this was you strictly don't need this because you have values that you can use like NaN. The problem there is a compiler doesn't help you. So here you know that this function has to handle the value being missing. And if you don't handle it, like you have to handle it this. Compiler will tell you. This is not ideal because now you have two ways to represent the duration being missing. You can use nil or you can use NaN. That was the motivation behind this bug or work item. Saying let's not do that, let's have only one way. But then we lose compiler checking. I guess it's fine. Let's not change something that works perhaps better than it would be after the defect. Okay. Yeah, let's see if we can tackle this. Is non-real-time video. Control click. The time-lapse mode and light trail video mode are both non-real-time video. Was this the syntax we used? Is dot type dot self. The Swift meta type system is very complicated. Swift in general is an overly complicated. Okay, now this should work correctly if some other class is introduced in the future, which is a non-real-time video mode other than time lapse and light. Now, do you even need this function? Now it's also symmetric. You see this if mode type is non-recording mode dot type, then if it is a non-real. Let's look at ifs. This function has been removed. So you'll see that when you make a refactoring, you often do it step by step. First, I fix the implementation of it. Then I realize this function is a very thin wrapper that doesn't make sense. Okay, great. Remove pubs up. Let's see if we can take a stab at it. Yeah, this is the only one that is used. Lock or unlock modes. So the basic point here is the app follows a freemium model. When you open the app for the first time, you see 4 modes. And each of these lets you take 10 photos in that mode. Then the mode becomes locked. Unless the user makes an in-app purchase. So now this lock or unlock modes, which is what we should be searching for actually, is posted in multiple places. This is from the this is a global variable. So that's the problem with PubSub. So PubSub in general leads to spaghetti code. I'm not saying it should never be used. It exists for a reason. But see if you can take a callback. That's also local. So the problem with that is if A invokes B invokes C invokes D, then D needs to invoke a callback on C, which needs to invoke a callback on B. So it needs to percolate back up, which is annoying. And PubSub is tempting because it cuts through this call tree, but it makes it non-local. So that's the problem. So I think this will require a bigger refactor. This is also a singleton. There are too many singletons in the code base. That was a mistake I made. Let's see if there's something else. Let's see. Abstract multi-frame photo mode has only one class. That's here too. I think there's a good separation. If you merge the two classes, it may become too complicated. And leaving it as it is also helps. You want to introduce another another multi-frame photo in the future. Currently, you have only long exposure. So this, and I think the earlier version of the code did have multiple of these. That is why you had an abstract class. So I think this is one of those things where if you if you could go back in time, you probably wouldn't have added the base class. But now that you do have it, is there any point in removing? Or is it just change for the sake of change? Yeah, we'll just leave it as. Sometimes you don't need refactor. Use async event. This will help. I'm just a little hesitant to make this change without the compile. This is a major task. So is. This requires some of the statics to be eliminated. You can see one straight. So that's the problem with singletons or global variables or statics. They make it very easy to create other problems without knowing. So we'll leave it at that. We'll revisit one of these in a subsequent.